So now that we've said a little bit more about inductive arguments and the kind of inductive argument that Bostrom is going to present, I think it's good to just, get the simulation argument in outline on the table. So let's just talk about the premises of it, the sort of assumptions he makes, or at least things, that he thinks are likely, right? It might be a little unfair to say these are assumptions. He's just saying, well, these are statements that are likely. I can't 100% prove them, but I think they're pretty probable, right? That's how an inductive argument works, right? Unlike a deductive argument, you don't, trade in certainty. Doesn't mean Bostrom doesn't have any evidence for these claims. We'll talk about what that evidence is, but he doesn't show them 100%, doesn't want to show them beyond any possible doubt. Though he does think they are rather likely. We'll talk about how likely he thinks they are and why. Okay, so first step. Suppose it's possible to run a simulation that also simulates human minds perfectly or reasonably well, right? We figure out what's going on in the human mind. Let's just say in some way that it's all due to the brain, the neurons firing, and we figure out a computer program that simulates that just as perfectly as, we can simulate what the weather's doing, if not better. Well, if we could get a simulation like that, let's make it even better than our weather ones, right? Let's say we get one that simulates what's going on in our neurons almost perfectly, right? Well, if we could do that, a lot of people would think that this simulation would be conscious, right? What is a computer? What are the intelligent computers that we see in science fiction movies, like Mr. Data or HAL in 2001? If you haven't seen HAL in 2001, it's great. He's the first example of the emotional, incredibly crazy computer. He's really frightening. Anyway, if you haven't seen it, the movie's a little boring in parts, but Hal at least is a great character, right? But so you picture these intelligent computers. We can add Bender on Futurama, right? They all simulate the human mind really well. We just assume that if they do that, they would be conscious. That is a pretty widespread and many people think pretty reasonable assumption. So, the next assumption. A technologically advanced civilization would run many simulations of its own past or of beings like it. In those simulations, you would have minds like our own, right? Simulated. So, if they're conscious, they would be conscious inside the simulation. A technologically advanced enough civilization could run these civilizations where everything is simulated, including the consciousnesses in the simulation. And we can also assume that they would have reasons they would want to run such simulations, right? Lots of different things, right? If we could simulate some historical event, we might learn a bit more about why it happened, right? If we could, right? We simulate what goes on inside stars. In computer models, we have a better idea of what's going on in stars because of our computer model, right? We simulate some historical event. I don't know, like we could say like the pandemic response, right? We might have a better idea of what happened and why. People might also just want to see about historical hypotheticals. People might run games like, run simulations like this just for fun, right? We already have games like The Sims where we sort of kind of simulate people just for fun. I don't know, it makes people feel like they have this godlike power or something. If it was super duper easy to run accurate simulations with lots of human consciousnesses in them, well, maybe a lot of people would do this, just out of sheer fun or curiosity, right? So, for a simulation, we might be in some lab, a simulation of some historical event. We might also just be some 14-year-old who's bored, sitting in his room, like having some fun with us, right? Those are some reasons, plenty of other reasons that this civilization would, if they could, run these simulations. So if a civilization gets to the point that they can run these simulations, they'll run a bunch. Some might be for, real scientific purpose. Others will just be entertainment. They might have even other reasons than that, right? If that's the case, if civilizations can run these simulations and they have good reasons to, well, once they get to be able to do it, there will be tens of thousands of simulations where there are conscious human minds, right? Everything's fake, but if there's a lot of human minds in these, and if the simulations of human minds, assuming that when they're good enough, they're conscious, all those simulated people would be conscious. All right. You guys are with me so far, I'll go through this a few times. It's in some sense, it's a simple enough idea. It's an old science fiction trope. But another, it's a pretty involved argument, right? I think a lot of good philosophical arguments are like that. The basic idea is simple. The actual execution is pretty complex. All right. But there would only be one real world that isn't a simulation, right? There would be a bunch of simulations, but all of those would have to be run in one real world. So assuming Bostrom is right, you have thousands, maybe tens of thousands, maybe millions of simulations and one base reality. All right, so suppose there are 10,000 simulations. Bostrom thinks this is a really conservative estimate. He thinks there would be millions. But let's just say there's 10,000, right? Well, what are the odds that we're living in base reality? If this is all right, then it's the same as, our bag of marbles question earlier, right? 100 marbles, can't remember, I think it was 99 red, 1 blue. You fish around in there, you can't see, and you pick one at random. 99% chance you're going to come out with the red one, not the blue one, right? Well, in the same way, there's no reason to think our world is special, so treat it as a random one. If 10,000 realities are simulated, or let's just make it neater, let's just say 9,999 are simulated, and one is real, you pick one at random, you have a 1 in 10,000 chance, right? If Bostrom is right, and the odds are even longer, if there are 1 million, or to simulate things again, make it a nice round number, 999,999, well, then there's one real reality, you have a 1 in a million chance of picking the real one out, right? So in the same way, what are our chances of being the real reality? Very, very unlikely, right? If there's thousands of these simulations, it's 1 in 1,000, 1 in some thousand. If there's millions, it's literally 1 in millions, right? So far, we don't have reason to think we're special. If we do have reason to think there are so many of these simulations, we can just think of our reality as one plucked at random. The odds are not good that it's base reality. Now look, why talk about this argument? Well, A, it's just a cool little mind bender. It messes with your head. Philosophers like that kind of thing, right? That's a good philosophical argument. But I think it also hooks in an interesting way with Descartes' argument, right? So Cartesian argument said, well, okay, folks, this could all be a dream or an elaborate hoax pulled on you by some powerful, not very nice being. And if it were a dream, or you were deluded by this powerful, mean being, you could never know that. You could never prove it otherwise, right? And remember, I said, well, that's true, but I don't know how seriously we should take that particular argument, right? In any other situation, you wouldn't take, well, this could be the case, but you'll never show you can never prove it false. We wouldn't take that super seriously, right? Your Honor, it might not be a murder. He might have been abducted by aliens. I don't know how you would ever prove that false. Go even further. It might not be a murder. Maybe he just poofed out of existence. Quantum random events. Poof. I don't know how you would prove that false. But again, we wouldn't have to take it very seriously. It would be on the attorney to prove that this is a serious possibility we need to consider. Same with no reason to think this guy's faked his disappearance. Well, he could have done it, and it could be really accurate. No reason to take that too seriously, right? But if the attorney said, well, he faked his disappearance in the past. He did this once and was gone 2 weeks. Who's to say now he hasn't done it again and is gone for 6 months, right? Or if the attorney adds on top of that, well, he did it in the past, and also a couple people say they've seen him. Then we would have to take this hypothesis more seriously. And in the same way, Bostrom's not just saying, well, it could be a computer simulation and you'd never know. Bostrom is giving us positive reason to take that possibility seriously. Here's a reason to think it's very likely that we are in a simulation, not just, oh, we could be and you'll never know. Here are positive reasons to think that we are. That is a lot different than just raising this possibility and saying, okay, prove me otherwise. Again, I think that's just throwing the burden of proof where it really doesn't belong, but saying, look, I'll give you a really powerful inductive argument to show that it's likely you are in a simulation. Well, Bostrom has shouldered the burden of proof and given us a pretty powerful argument, right? Now look, that doesn't mean that Bostrom is necessarily right? He's given us a seemingly powerful inductive argument. We're going to have to look at that argument step by step, point by point, much more closely to see if it's a good argument. But this is much more interesting and I think deserves to be taken much more seriously than, well, you could be wrong and there's no way to ever know or prove that you're not wrong, right? That's a little hand wavy to me. This deserves to be taken seriously in a deeper way, I do think. All right, Bostrom's argument in outline. A good simulation of the conscious mind would probably be conscious. A sufficiently technologically advanced civilization could almost certainly create such simulations, right? Simulations of human minds in simulated worlds, they would probably do this. They probably could do this, right? They probably would create such simulations. Either to find out stuff, either for scientific investigation or just boredom and interest, they'd create such simulations and see how things go. 4, we haven't talked much about this one yet, but it's a pretty important one. Civilizations are likely to last long enough to reach this point of technological advancement, right? We haven't gotten to this point yet, but Bostrom thinks we probably will. The only reason we might not, think about this, or so he would think, every year computers get more advanced by a pretty big margin. They're going to keep doing that. If that happens, it's really hard not to imagine, at least Bostrom thinks, won't get to a point where they're advanced enough to create these simulations. Well, one thing that might stop that is if we as a species wipe ourselves out before we get to that point. So, if we wipe ourselves out, or if civilizations generally are likely to wipe themselves out before they get to the point of simulation, then there might not be any simulations, right? We have to know how likely it is we'll ever, not just that a sufficiently technologically advanced civilization could do this, we have to know the odds that any civilization will ultimately get to that point of technological advancement. Conclusion of 1 through 4, then most worlds would be simulations. Final conclusion of the argument, just springing off of 5. Since most worlds are simulations, our world is probably a simulation. All right. So to evaluate this argument, 5 is just a consequence of 1 through 4, and 6 is just a consequence of 5. So the really interesting premises are 1 through 4. So what I want to do in the next few lectures is to look at them to see how well they hold up. Are they as likely as Bostrom thinks they are?